We're joined on Dallas Fanzine today by artist Kristina Hagman, granddaughter of the legendary actress Mary Martin and daughter of legendary actor Larry Hagman, and now author of The Eternal Party, Understanding My Dad, Larry Hagman, the TV star that America loved to hate. The book is a collaboration with author Elizabeth Kay. Kristina, thanks for talking to us today.
It's a pleasure to talk to you as well.
Now, I want to start with this quote from Larry Hagman's own biography, which you have included in your own book. And the quote goes, "Writing a book compels you to want to sum up your life. I'm not going to give in to that urge. Let somebody else sum up my life when it's over." Kristina, I'm sitting here thinking, who better to sum up that life than his own daughter? Can you tell us why you decided to write a book about your dad at this point in your own life?
Well, certainly his loss was huge in my own life. I was very close to him, and as anybody who cares for Larry Hagman, they all know what a big personality he was, and I miss him very, very much. The other aspect of it was I had people stop me in the street and email and Facebook and calling me and telling me all these great stories. And I felt that, just as you said, that perhaps it would be nice to have stories from somebody who was very close to him out in the world.
Now, from the beginning of the book, the reader is thrust into, we'll say, a frank, honest and emotional account about the life of your father and indeed your own family life. On the lighter side, you describe him as a man who never changed, we'll say light bulbs, he never did the dishes or paid the bills. And by the end of the book, we learn that he's a very loving but complex human being. When writing the book, were you worried that some of your dad's fans and, we'll say, admirers would change their perception of him by revealing such an honest account of his life in the book?
Well, I think that the other reason that I wrote this book is that it's important for everybody to know that we're just a family like everybody else has families. When people put a star on a pedestal and make him or her bigger than possible. In other words, if you put people on a pedestal, they're no longer human. I wanted to write a book that showed the human side of my father and the human side of our family. And instead of having a cardboard cutout of J.R., Larry Hagman, Tony Nelson, you have a real picture of the real person with all of his struggles and all of his good sides.
As a fan of Larry, I found it very touching reading your words about his final days in that hospital in Dallas back in November 2012 before losing his battle with leukemia. The fact that his family was around him in those final days seems now to be a blessing. Was your family planning to be in Dallas at that time, even before your father was hospitalized?
Yes. My dad had worked really hard at planning a fantastic Thanksgiving. That was Thanksgiving weekend. I know in the UK you guys don't have Thanksgiving, and there's lots of people that think Thanksgiving is sort of strange. But it's an American holiday that's all about family. And Dad had spent really a month or two preparing the perfect Thanksgiving dinner for all the members, except sadly my mother, whose Alzheimer's was too far advanced for her to travel. And, one can't help but wonder that he didn't plan the whole thing.
I wasn't expecting to read about Larry's girlfriend entering the hospital room and getting into the bed beside him. The perception the world has had about your dad is that, he was a faithful husband to your mother. But you write in the book about a string of affairs that he had. How did you and your mother react and cope with this over the years?
Well, my mother now, can't speak. The Alzheimer's has taken her too far away from that. And frankly, I probably wouldn't have written this if my mother would have objected, but she's been far beyond objecting for a very, very long time. And I do believe that my father's affairs took something of a toll on my mother, but I also know that my mother always wanted to be married to him, and that marriages are more than just sexual relationships. My mother and father were truly partners. Whatever may have happened in terms of extramarital affairs, my father always loved my mother and always stuck by her.
You write that during your dad's memorial services, you were approached by several women who were telling you how much your dad touched their lives. Was there an element of paranoia happening with you, thinking that maybe, this woman or that woman was a former lover of your father's?
I think some of them made it very clear that they were, and others I didn't know whether they were or not. And in the long run, I've come to the conclusion that, unless somebody tells me outright that they were, I will assume they were just friends. My father loved women in a big sense. He loved and respected women in many ways, and I think he had a lot of really good female friends as well.
You and your brother were exposed to the celebrity culture when you were young, meeting, all the top actors of the time, going to parties and travelling around the world with your father. Were you able to take all this splendour in, or did it just kind of seem the norm for you at the time?
That's an interesting question. I think that until I was in my mid-20s, I was just swept away by it and didn't quite realize how extraordinary it was. And then when I was in my mid-30s and had children and, had to lead a very quiet life as a devoted mother, then I realized, my word, I really did get to see extraordinary things and go places that, had I not been connected to JR, I never would have seen.
Kristina, can you talk a little bit about your father's love for pot, the substance that you write that, he was he fell in love with? And also, can we blame Jack Nicholson for this?
Well, Dad does in his book, Dad blame. I don't think Dad blames Jack Nicholson. I think Dad honors Jack Nicholson for that gift. Dad loved it. I think each person has their own likes and dislikes. I mean, certainly the use of marijuana is under a lot of change here in the United States. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work for me. I just become a blithering idiot. But my dad loved it, and it calmed him down. And prior to smoking pot, he used to be a 3-pack a day smoker.
That's right.
So I was critical of him when he was alive. I was critical of his pot smoking. And after he died, I missed him, and I felt regret for any criticism of my dad. So I'll be honest and say I tried it again. I discovered yet again that it really doesn't work for me. But I also came to an understanding, or at least perspective, that it helped him. It helped him be who he was, and he was a pretty darn fantastic person.
I was amazed to read that up until his death, he kept hash brownies in his fridge.
Yeah.
And you mentioned there that he smoked, 3 packs of cigarettes a day all those years ago. I interviewed Larry for Dallas Fanzine back, I think it was 2010. And Larry, he gave me advice on how to stop smoking when I interviewed him back then. And thankfully, I'm off the cigarettes now.
Hey, congratulations.
Thank you. Now, you dabbled in the acting world, Kristina, and appeared in the US hit show Archie Bunker's Place. Plus, you had a few small roles on the Dallas TV series under the name of Heidi Hagman. I think you first appeared as a secretary in a scene with J.R. Ewing at a sanitarium back in 1979. And at one time, you appeared at a masquerade ball in 1986. Did you spend much time on the Dallas set over those years with your father?
Oh, yeah. I spent a lot of time on the I Dream of Jeannie set, and I was older and had my own life, and I was in college, and I had, my own thing going on when Dallas was being shot. But yes, we spent a lot of time on the set, and our family was always included, and that masquerade ball was especially fun. Did
you get to know any of the cast well?
I would say Linda Gray was always at every family birthday and event. The whole cast and crew came to my 21st birthday and my first wedding. But, there's something important to having your own life when your father is very famous. And only when we would be in family functions. I never really socialized with them outside of family functions.
How would you describe your father's friendship with Patrick Duffy and Linda Gray?
Absolutely supportive, wonderful, fantastic. Linda was always such a lovely influence in my dad's life. You know, she was always cared about his diet and well-being, and was a genuinely loving and sweet friend. And Patrick was, you know, Dad's playmate, and they did a lot of pranks on the set together, and they laughed a lot. I think they were super fantastic work companions.
Let's go back to your youth now, Kristina. Can you share what Dennis Hopper wanted to do with you when you were 15 years old? Now, we won't spoil for the readers what your dad's reaction to this was. Let them buy the book and find that out. But the whole scenario here, it is very disturbing.
Oh, it is. And you know, this is one of those points in the book where I wasn't quite sure about adding it, because it is quite disturbing. On the other hand, I thought, if I added what happened to me, maybe another young woman could get herself out of a tough situation. So Dennis Hopper came to my house and he was stoned, and he brought a bunch of friends. And at one point, he turned to one of the women, his companions, and said, "Get her in the jacuzzi. I want to, you know what."
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I can say that, but it was a sexual content that was very, very disturbing and upsetting. And I was only 15 at the time. In the U.S., you have to be 16 to be able to drive. But I had taken a couple of driver's lessons, and I grabbed the car keys, and I climbed out a window and down a tree and out, got in the car, and took off. And, you know, if you feel threatened and you feel uncomfortable, that's just what you have to do, no matter how famous or important or attractive or rich that person is threatening you. I got away.
Mm. Are you comfortable talking about what happened with Larry Hall and your father's reaction to that?
You know, I think out of context, it's not appropriate to talk about. I think that's a longer, more serious conversation.
Okay, I respect that. Kristina, you mentioned in the book that your dad liked secrets and admired men who were able to keep secrets. Why do you think that was?
I mean, doesn't everyone love a mystery?
I guess you're right.
Everyone loves to have intrigue, and I think it just adds layers of personality. Now, myself, I'm not, obviously. If you've read the book, you can see that I am an open book, and that I do not particularly like secrets. But my dad did. I think he found it challenging and interesting. I think that actors do have so many different lives. That's their job. They slip into different skins, and they're different people. So I think he was intrigued by the whole concept of mystery and secrets.
You write of much love and affection for your Granny, Mary Martin. Her acting career took her away from raising your dad, so he was basically brought up by his grandmother, Juanita. And was there a difficult relationship between your grandmother and father as they reconnected after the death of Juanita?
You know, I think that it was, grandmother's career was really taking off about the time that her mother passed away. And she and her husband, Richard Halliday, were complete partners in creating her stardom. They really were. They really had a goal of making Mary one of the most loved characters in the musical theater world, and they succeeded at doing that. And yes, my father was sort of collateral damage in that. You know, she did what she could, but her career did come first. And I think that's a challenge many women still face today. It's really hard to be a mother and a successful artist, and my grandmother did what she could. She sent him to a very wonderful private school where Dad made the best friends of his entire life. It was a small boarding school, but I think it was very difficult for the two of them.
How did your dad cope with Mary's second husband, Richard Halliday?
Richard and my father never got along. You know, I think that, what can I say? Richard wanted to be the only man in my grandmother's life, and my father was in the way.
One thing that struck me from reading the book was the happiness you felt during the more frugal times in your dad's career when, as a family you were camping out or you were out on the open road. Were these good times for you personally, Kristina?
Absolutely. So spectacular. The being out in nature with your own family, and that we were so close, and there was no distractions, and there was no, like I was saying about an actor who's truly an actor, as my father and grandmother were, they love to slip into different roles, and they're on, capital O-N in quotations all the time. But out there in nature, when it was just the four of us, we were really, truly intimate and good and happy and had a great time.
You write in the book that apart from a couple of months after your dad's life-saving liver transplant back in 1995, he still kept drinking, something that he always had denied in the media.
Yes, that's unfortunate.
Did you avoid being around your dad when he was drinking?
You couldn't avoid being around my dad when he was drinking because he was always drinking. He did stop drinking just for I don't know how many months prior to the transplant and how many months after the transplant, but except for that perhaps span of 2 years, my dad drank from early morning till he went to bed.
Wow.
He was very, he'd been drinking since his early teens, and he was very good at, certainly he was never sloppy. He was always professional. He was very well prepared for his work. He never was mean, but he was always drinking.
Strong, reckless and fearless is how you describe your talented mother in her prime. So one of the actual hardest things for me to read in your book is her rapid decline, succumbing to Alzheimer's, which sadly brought out a lot of anger in her. How have you come to terms with your mum's illness?
Well, this is another reason to write the book too. So many of us all, have friends and family who are suffering from Alzheimer's, and it's important to know that you're not alone. That this is something that we have to cope with. And I very fortunately went to a caregivers Alzheimer's support group that is run by Ronald Reagan's daughter, Patty Davis. And she was very, very helpful for me to come to terms with the very sad decline of losing someone while they're still alive. And I see my mother as often as I can, but it's a tough one. And we all have to comfort each other during these difficult times.
Did your mum's illness have anything to do with your father deciding to auction off pretty much all of his possessions back in 2011?
Well, certainly. He downsized his life and made it more flexible after my mother's illness. He sold his very big house. But I don't think he would have had an auction if it hadn't been for Darren Julian and Martin Nolan being such good friends. He'd auctioned off a motorcycle with them earlier and had such a grand time with these guys. They're such wonderful people. And Dad and I got together with Martin and Darren and, met a couple of times. And then I worked with them very closely to put together the auction. And it was a wonderful experience. And right about the time that the auction was going to happen, the producers of the new Dallas TV series were wondering if they should go forward with it. And Dad, in the middle of the night, got this brilliant idea that he would get on a horse with Linda Gray and a horse beside him and ride down the center of Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills, which was a huge success, a great publicity stunt. And it was on the cover of the New York Times, LA Times, the London Times. And very interestingly, that next week, they decided that they would go with the next Dallas. You can't say that it's necessarily changed their minds, but Dad sure had a nose for publicity.
We missed out on some of the Dallas scripts being auctioned at the time, but later we were able to buy a few from a private seller. And one thing that struck me is how much your father rewrote his dialogue for the show. And it's very interesting seeing his little side notes on the scripts.
He worked very closely with Linda and Patrick and all his fellow actors at fine-tuning things. He did that way back in the days of I Dream a Genie and certainly in Dallas as well.
How tough was it to hear that your dad, who had been through so much, had been diagnosed with cancer?
It was devastating. It came at a very difficult time. He was so, he'd done everything he could to make my mother as comfortable as possible, and realized that, he was still alive too. One of the problems with Alzheimer's is often the caregiver, the one closest to the person with Alzheimer's, gets ill, from stress sooner than the Alzheimer's person dies. And Dad had figured out that he would take care of my mother with all the best ways that he could, but he wanted to go on with his life, and he was getting more work, really starting to get back into the swing of things. Acting for him was everything. He loved working. He loved being in front of an audience. He loved working with his fellow actors. So just as things were picking up again after many difficult years of working to care for my mother, he found out that he had cancer, and it was very sad for all of us.
Kristina, has writing this book been a form of personal therapy for you?
Oh, I hope it's been a lot more than that. The therapy for me comes from, I have a very large, wonderful group of family and friends and I feel that for my personal care, I go to them. I'm hoping that the book reaches other people, and it's not just about my own catharsis.
Of course, you're a very talented artist in your own right as well, and have worked with many mediums and have exhibited your work for many years. More recently, you've been working on wood block prints. Were you encouraged at a young age to express your artistic abilities?
Absolutely. Coming from an artistic family, I was definitely encouraged. As a kid, I had dyslexia, which is a learning disability where it becomes difficult to read and write. I think my grandmother had it and several other members of our family, whereas perhaps other families would, get you all the educational help you could. My family said, well, you can't do this, but you paint really well. Focus on what's positive instead of focusing on what's difficult. And so, yes, I think they encouraged me a great deal.
And of course, people can discover more about your art on your website, KristinaHagman.com.
Yes, thank you.
Well, Kristina, it's now time to say gong bong to you. Kristina, we really appreciate you talking with us today on dallasfanzine.com, and we wish you every success with the book and your future projects.
Well, thank you for your sensitive and kind questions.